first thing, what we're hoping is going to be a number of training webinars. We're hearing from members that they would like to receive more training on a range of issues, and people asking for training on data analysis has come up a few times. And so this is new content that we're presenting. And so we would like to get a little bit of feedback from you as well as part of this. To start, I might just ask that if you would like, you could put in the chat some of your objectives or an objective that you would like to get out of this webinar, and we'll try to sort of read it as we go. I'm also just going to put, before anyone does that, and it's all flooded with chat messages, this is a Google form that we have that you can use to evaluate the webinar at the end, but we don't want to make you wait to the end to give it to you. Ask just a few simple questions about what you thought of the webinar, what you'd like more detail on, and what you might have liked less detail on. And feel free to answer as much or as little of it as you want. But it was also asking a bit about why you're here. And so if some of you are here for training or continuing education, we'd like to know that. And then what are the requirements that are associated with that? Do you need for us to be certified? If you need to count this towards training and continuing education, it would be good for us to know. So with that, we'll just dive into it. And again, we're hoping we have a fair bit of content. We've got an hour and a half to go through it. There's a lot that I'm going to try to go through relatively quickly. So you can always let us know if you think that it's going a little bit too fast, but also just to know that we're going to have questions at the end. We'd like to hear from you about some real examples that you might be working on, you might be struggling with. And so as we pass through some content relatively quickly, don't worry if it goes by and you didn't get it. We can always go back and talk about it. And a reminder that all of this is being recorded. So it's kind of a wide range of topics that we're gonna cover here, dealing broadly with data analysis and some of the concepts that you have to deal with. Again, there's a lot here that's fairly intuitive, and I'm going to repeat again, this is a beginner level webinar, but it's still good to cover these topics, even as just to make sure you're aware of them and possibly as a jumping off point for discussion. So we're going to talk about choosing indicators, writing with data for non-technical audiences, some of the limitations you have to deal with when working with small area data, some storytelling tips, comparing communities to benchmarks, change over time, working with geographies, and these all mix in a little bit with each other. So you might find a little bit of repetition. August and I are going to tag team this, and we both cover some of the same topics, but don't worry about it. So again, if you want to throw some into the chat, some of your objectives for being here, maybe while I'm presenting, Sadie or August can have a look at them, and we can keep it in mind as we continue. And we're curious to know about how you use training events like this for professional development.
Yes, we got one response from that objectives you ask. They're saying looking to become familiar with the CDP site and learn what kind of data is available and what level of localization the data is available for.
Okay, that's good to know, because I have a section on that I was going to say I don't want to cover this because it's a bit too much detail, but I'll leave some resources for you at the end. But I could maybe try to go a bit more into some of the data sets in detail, because that is part of being able to analyze data is just starting with getting the data. And some of it is just starting with getting the data is choosing your indicator. So I'll just jump into it. You want to know how to measure something, and there's lots and lots of data out there. So choosing the right indicator is always just best. You start with the question that you want answered. How serious is something? How many? Where are people living alone? I've got a few examples here, and you may not be able to answer that question directly. If the data exists for that particular question, it's answered by an indicator. That's great, but quite often it isn't. You may need a proxy. The process of just asking that question is still worthwhile to think about how you're going to go about answering the question, and it demands a certain level of transparency that you're trying to get at a certain issue, but this is how you're measuring it, and you need to make that link transparent. So, and then obviously, if you're wanted to ask a question on housing, you wanted to ask a question on poverty, then you're going to be matching your indicator to the concept. You're going to want to find data on housing or poverty. So that requires an understanding of what data sets are available. And this is the part where I have a list of some of the data sets that we have in our catalog, and I can provide a brief description of what's in there. But that can take up quite a lot of time. So I'll try to do that at the end of my section somewhat quickly to give you an idea of what there is. And then if there's time at the end, I do have a lot more detailed slides with a description of the data sets, and you can ask questions, and I'm happy to answer them. But also, if we're talking specifically about the data program, the catalog is a great place to start, or just sending us an email at information@communitydata.com, and we can ask your questions to help you match indicators and data to the concept that you're thinking of. Again, just some very basic concepts here. If you're thinking about what you want to have answered, you think about the types of indicator. You can generally present data in terms of account or percentages and rates. If you're getting a little bit more complex, there's indexes that people create which summarize multiple indicators, but generally account is going to be considering the scale of something. Percentages and rates, you're looking at prevalence and concentration, relative importance. But what you want to be thinking of is how many, how common, how severe. Like, again, get back to your question that you want to have answers. So it's a bit of a crowded slide, but it's always good to think about the audience and the use that the data is going to have. Is this for internal analysis, or is it public presentation? So you might want to have something a little bit more detailed. If it's for internal analysis, you can, if this is an ongoing discussion you're going to be having with your colleagues, versus public presentation, where you want to be conveying a few simple, clear messages. So an example of this might be, maybe you've seen an age distribution pyramid to tell you what the age distribution is in the community. But for public presentation, you might just want to give a simple indicator on the share of a certain age group in the population.
Michael, we got another objective. If it's okay, if we jump in.
Yeah, please.
So they are from FedNor. They are asking that, or mentioning that the objective for them is they are looking to learn how to access disaggregated data more efficiently for remote and rural communities in Northern Ontario.
Okay. So that's a bit of like data access through our catalog. Some of that is covered in some of the orientation webinars, but we can definitely talk about that in questions if needed. When thinking about the indicators that you want to choose, comparability is something that you want to have in mind. There's various aspects of comparability. This again is somewhat intuitive, but if you're just looking at the counts of something, that's often not comparable because two geographies that you're considering are different sizes. The most basic comparability issue that you might have to sense. But additionally, if you're thinking and wanting to measure income over time, then measuring in current dollars may not be as good as looking at inflation adjusted dollars. If you're dealing with average income rather than median income, average income is very highly affected by high-end values. And so it's if the area that you're looking at may have some just a few pockets of rich neighborhoods, then that may distort the data that the averages that you're going to be getting. So medians are often preferable, but if you want to be comparing median incomes across regions and there's very different household types within different regions, then that again makes it hard to come up with an accurate comparison. You may need to cut a little bit more deeply into the data to look at media income by different household types. Similarly, if you're looking at something like employment income, if you have in areas where there's a lot of students or seniors or part-time workers, that can skew your data. Even something as simple as median age, you can have similar median ages, but it's hiding very different age structures. Or you can see how different age structures can affect educational attainment. If you want to look at how accessible, or using educational attainment as some factor towards deprivation or risk, it may not be comparable if you have different age structures between different communities. And again, when you may have a certain issue that you are wanting to measure. So I would say refer to this as a focus indicator. If you're looking at housing affordability and you want to talk about the percent of renter households that are spending 30% or more of their income on shelter, that can say a lot. However, you're going to need some context for that in your analysis. That really should be accompanied by the context, such as the percent of households that rent, or even the count of renter households, to get an idea of the scale of the issue. Is this something that is worth looking at, or why is it that you're focused on this issue? Going in the other direction, if you want to be looking at talking about age and isolation, you might be looking at the number of seniors as a percent of the total population. But if you're talking about seniors living alone, that could be considered as a percent of all seniors, or it could be a percent of the population living alone. And so the choice of your denominator here is really defined by the story that you want to tell. And this all seems rather intuitive, but it starts to get a little bit more complex when you start adding other dimensions here. If we're talking about immigrant seniors living alone, you've got age, immigration status, and your housing situation. And so what is the denominator that you're going to be choosing there? That depends on the story that you want to be telling, the question that you're answering. And so you have to go back to that to think about how you want to cut the data. What is so thing at that? The choice of denominator. The denominator really is going to help shape the interpretation. And as I said, it comes from the story that you're trying to tell. And another example of this, where you're talking about low-income seniors, if you want to understand the prevalence of low income among seniors, then you're looking at low-income seniors divided by the total number of seniors. But if you're looking at the different phases of low income, then it could be low-income seniors divided by the total low-income population.
We have two more objectives.
Sure, thanks.
I think three. One is that they are looking for advice on how to present or communicate data most effectively, best practices in terms of clarity, design choice, format, and more.
Okay.
The other one is that we have plans to update our community plan for our local immigration partnership. We will be looking for a lot data, and I'm hoping to learn where to start and what data to focus on.
Okay. These all sound like great objectives.
Yeah, and then the kind of last one for now is just looking to have a better understanding of what is
Visit you on the
available
weekends.
and the question that can be answered. I feel like we don't utilize the program to its full extent, especially interested in early learning and childcare data. If there is anything, as we look to update our 5-year plan, we often pull general population stats, but haven't really explored much more than that. Having access to the PCCF has been very helpful, though.
Okay. Okay, these would be, we can, maybe at the end, we can try to, there's, I guess, a lot of different objectives, but we'll see how much much we can dive into these. Uh, in a similar vein, as I was talking about before, of selecting your denominator, when you're looking at data tables, it's important to understand the data universe that you're considering. So, the data universe, can be measured in persons, it can be measured in households, families, dwellings, but it starts to cut the population or various universes into smaller and smaller sections as you deal with more specialized concepts. So something from labor force survey or something where you're dealing with labor force concepts might deal with only the employed persons aged 15 and over. That's a common universe for those types of indicators. And then you can have other subsets of these universes. And that addresses as well the idea of comparability. You may be taking account, and if you want to compare it to other population measures, you should really be making sure that these population measures have similar universes, or just make it explicit the differences in what you're considering. Just a few examples of this, person level traits, are things like age and education, immigration, labor force status, household, you're talking about tenure and shelter costs, or the income of the whole household. And some tables deal explicitly with families, tax filer. Data has a lot of tables that's just on families. So might be looking at couple families, low income families. And these tables, again, are possibly just a subset of the entire population. You have what are referred to as non-family persons. I don't know if that was considered
Michael,
politically
sorry,
incorrect.
there is some technical issues here. There's some
Okay.
audio cutting in and out.
On
Is it something?
my audio is cutting in and out.
Yes, yeah, and it's
Is
kind of
everyone experiencing
consistent.
that?
Yeah,
Okay, I
many
wonder if
experiencing that.
there is uh, there is quite, fortunately, it seems like there's a truck just working right outside my door right now. They scheduled that well. I'll try to speak a little bit louder, and let the mic hopefully will pick up just my voice and not the truck. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, let me know if it's not working. But at a certain point, if it becomes that you can't hear me, then maybe we'll have to switch to August's presentation. But for now, I'll continue like this.
I think it sounds good now.
Okay.
Anyone else?
So you might have a lot of family level tables that don't consider persons that are not in a family. So these could be just one person households, or number of unrelated roommates. But in some cases, they are considered a non-family person is considered a family unit for the purposes of comparing family level data. So that's something to consider when you're looking at these data. But exceptions do exist. So you can obviously have tables about persons who are in a certain household situation. So the number of persons in households that are overcrowded, for example. And then in our catalog, we have, tables that treat households which are defined by person level demographic traits. So if you want to have data on, say, an immigrant household or a racialized household, Aboriginal household, then you need to first have a definition of what is a racialized household or an immigrant household. And once you've made that definition, you can get Statistics Canada to create some tables, based on households defined by person level demographic traits. But typically you can see that person level traits are used for just describing certain types of certain universes, and household universes are used for defining certain other types of data. And just a little more detail on this point, that it can get quite narrow, your universe, and it sometimes it's quite obvious. If you're dealing with unemployment, you're dealing with the labor force, or the employed population. Unemployment is measured as a percentage of the labor force and not just the total population. Commuting looks at persons with a usual place of work, and maybe is not considering people that are working from home. Core housing need, which is a popular concept, not just looks at household, but it's a restricted household universe that doesn't consider. You're looking at shelter cost to income ratios. So what percentage of your income you're spending on shelter. The CMHC doesn't consider shelter costs. If you're spending 100% of your income or more on shelter, then CMHC doesn't consider that interpretable. So the universe is restricted to ratios that are below 100%, and it can get even more complicated than that. Based often, just because you're looking at the relevant population, but it may be for analytical reasons where you are avoiding some invalid ratio. If you're dividing by an income, then you don't want to have an income of zero. So those households with zero income are excluded. And another one that comes up regularly, if you're looking at census tables, you'll often see in the definition that the tables are based on persons or household, like in private households. And so what this typically excludes are collective dwellings. So long-term care, shelters, correctional facilities, that sort of thing. And you can see when you go into a table in Beyond 2020, if I pick a file and look at the summary, often the file will give me, well, maybe not this one, but will give me an idea of the universe. Looking at core housing need, if I look at the summary, the name of the title for private households in non-farm, non-band, non-reserve households with household incomes greater than zero and cost income ratios less than 100%. You can see how the universe is getting cut down to something very specific. So this is not, so you can't say that this is about all households. It's a specific cut of, it's a specific data universe. So as I mentioned before, if you want to be when you're choosing your indicator, you necessarily need to have an understanding of what data sets are out there to match the indicator to the concept. So these are some of the data sets that are in the Community Data Program catalog. And again, I'm going to try to go through these very quickly because I think that we uh, don't have tons of time. I'm going to just ask if you have your mic on, maybe you could mute it unless you're asking a question.
Looks like something bit you. Nothing.
Or I can mute you, actually.
Yeah. We got a question, Michael. Should we wait until end of your presentation?
Let's see, we're about a half an hour in, and yeah, why don't we wait just a little bit, just so that I can make sure that we get through all of this. I do think, we have the data sets, an explanation of those covered in some of the orientations, and I'm happy to get into a little bit more detail, but briefly, tax filer, the census, I think many people are familiar with, and it covers quite a wide range. But so I'll talk a little bit more about some of the lesser known data sets. Tax filer it is an annual data set that deals a lot with income and family structure. Canadian business counts, you can look at the number of businesses, business locations or establishments by the industry type or the size of the business. The postal code conversion file can take data at the postal code level and assign it to certain census geographies. Longitudinal immigration database looks at economic and mobility outcomes for the immigrant population. That's an example of a very restricted universe. Longitudinal administrative data bank can do a fair bit. We use it for looking at low income dynamics. How long do people stay in low income? Or entry rates and exit rates. Sorry. Building permits, the number and value of building permits for tracking economic development. Perhaps we have consumer and mortgage debt data. It's important to note for the estimates of population by age of sex, we get them at the CSD level, but StatsCan has stopped for the 2025 data year providing population estimates by age and sex. So I wanted to make note of that here. Some health surveys, just providing general health indicators on population 12 and over or on children and youth. We do get a custom order from Canadian Survey on Disability for getting these data at certain census divisions and census subdivisions. Internet use, Canadian Index of Multiple Deprivation, it rolls up a number of indicators to describe deprivation. The Labor Force Survey, I think many of you are familiar with. We also have data at the CSD level for a certain number of census divisions and census subdivisions. That's relatively new. A lot of data from CMHC on the housing market. Some modeled estimates of liquid assets. That's a while ago. IRCC, it's a bit harder to get data from them recently, but we do have a lot of data on temporary and permanent residents, and then stats on recipients of employment insurance. That's a quick run through. I want to just make sure that I leave August enough time to get through his part, so I'll keep going with the next section on writing for non-technical audiences. This again, a lot of this is maybe a bit intuitive, but just it's worth noting some basics. One of the main ones is to start with your main message. You can start with the headline, and to make sure that you're focusing on that message and not on all of the data that you have available. So you probably know what matters most to the audience, and it's important to focus on that. So it's that the numbers should really be supporting a central point, your main message. For each chart or for each section that you're using, obviously you may have a number of different messages, but of course this can vary for different audiences. And again, I just have this note on appendices here. You may have lots of data. You don't need to give it to everyone. You can throw a lot of it, at the end of your document. That's everyone. Appendices are your friend. So just an example, there's a lot of numbers thrown in the before example here. I'm setting up a bit of a straw man as the example, but what you want to be talking about is perhaps the rental housing affordability. So focus on that number. 42% of rental households were spending 30% or more of their income on shelter. And telling people what that means. Affordability is a significant local issue. Again, relatively intuitive, but use clear, plain language. Try to avoid technical or statistical terms, particularly if this is public facing. And explain what the numbers mean. Explain what the numbers mean and connect it to your message, to the issue being discussed. So, here we're talking about shelter cost burden, benchmark values. It may just be necessary to talk about, that a higher share of rental households are struggling with housing costs than compared to the surrounding areas. And as we talked about before, you have your focus indicators, but you're going to need to have context to say why something's important. So the context and comparison helps to keep results meaningful. So that can be comparing to a place or groups. August will talk a little bit more about this. But you also want to keep it manageable so that you're not overwhelming the audience. So for example, in this case, this is just adding, explaining what it's about. The community is older, and there's a comparison here to let you know why this number is significant. It always helps to support your message with simple presentation. I'll talk a little bit. You can't help if you're talking about this and to talk a bit about data visualization. We have some webinars on data visualization, and August is going to talk about this as well. So I'll try to just brush over this quickly. But you want to avoid crowding charts, complex tables as much as possible. Again, get to the main message that you want to support. And you don't need to build to your message with the data. You can start with the message that you start with your conclusion and then provide the support. Talking about data visualization, it's an important part of data analysis. Choosing your chart type is important. Bar charts for comparisons, line charts for trends over time, maps. When no one knows the name of their census tract, but looking at it like this makes it a little bit clearer what you're talking about. Again, keep your visuals focused on the main message, and you make your comparisons easy to see. So sorting something from lowest to highest or highest to lowest lets you see the comparisons more easily. Which values are smaller or larger than others, and you can group things accordingly. So here's a little bit of things to do and things to avoid. You can see in the recommendations of what to do. They've gotten rid of the grid lines. They're usually not important, particularly if you have labels. You don't need, too many decimal points. Ordering, it's maybe not so evident when you only have 3 communities that you comparison, but with a lot of different data points, ordering from smaller to larger helps to make it stand out, the different trends. And there's a lot of information here you don't need. The axis here is quite detailed, and the title is very detailed, but oftentimes you don't need an axis at all. If you have a good introduction to what you're talking about, you may just want to delete it. Start by deleting as much as is necessary, as much as just keep what is necessary to make your message. And so when we're talking about how to write for non-technical audiences, it's great to look for other examples. Strong sources, will move from the number that you have to its meaning, and then the implication of it. We have a lot of examples on our website. There's a link here on to how CDP members use community data. But another great source is the Daily. If you're using StatsCan's data, they do a great job of writing about their own data. If you go to the Daily and look at the release for a particular data set and indicator, they often have great examples on how to talk about these numbers. But if you're making a community profile, a dashboard, we have examples you can look up to see how other people do it. And there's some great examples out there. Really quickly before I pass it over to August, we had interest. People were interested in some of the limitations associated with looking at small area data. We do have a lot of small area data in our catalog. Neighborhood level patterns are useful, but it's important to note that some of the results can be a lot less stable than the data for larger geographies. If you think about a neighborhood with a few large apartment developments between census events, that the results for that neighborhood are going to change quite a lot over time. And it's good to, if you can, to do a little bit of ground truthing to understand the truth behind some of these, some data. Does this even pass the smell test for what you can see on the ground? Obviously, small numbers can make differences look a lot bigger than they are. If you have 15 households with a particular 15 households in low income in neighborhood, and then that increases to 20, then that's a 33% increase, which seems like a lot, but it's just 5 households. So it's important to look at these kinds of changes. And then, one unusual value may not necessarily indicate a strong local pattern. If you think of an employment indicator, employment income or unemployment, if you're looking at an area that had a lot of seniors, a lot of students, then you have to take the values obviously with a grain of salt. As I mentioned before, small populations can cause large percentage shifts. Suppression is obviously an issue when you're dealing with small area data. And it may not be, it can be obvious when you're faced with, a value that's just not there, what to do. But what a lot of members want to do is they want to take multiple small areas like dissemination areas or census tracts and roll them up into their catchment area. And in that case, you are losing, suppression can make it so that it's harder to roll up that data from that source data meaningfully, which, a little side promotion points to the value of custom geographies, which our members should feel free to take advantage of. You can roll up standard geographies into your catchment area or give us a shapefile, and that's something that helps deal with suppression a lot. It helps to avoid issues like what I'm talking about. So data quality is obviously something that is a concern for small areas. And then random rounding. If you want to understand, StatsCan never or rarely gives you the exact number that you're looking at. Everything is rounded, for income data to the nearest 10 or sometimes the nearest 50 counts are rounded to the nearest 5. You see that the same, this average, some statistics, they will give you, that average number, but the number of households here, median household income, this is going to be rounded to the nearest 5 or incomes to the nearest 100. And then if you want to be aggregating some of that data, you need to just be aware that at certain levels, that rounding can make a difference. Just use it responsibly. Look at broader patterns. Just avoid the conclusions that you're building when you're just using some of these small level indicators. But be transparent. This text here is something that is a description that StatsCan gives when data have like an E grade, which is saying that it should be used with caution. And that is something for internal analysis. Maybe you can use it to try to get a sense of what trends are taking place in your community. But a lot of municipal organizations, health units, use with caution essentially means don't use it. And it's important not to make too strong a conclusion from data like this. So that's my section. And I've got the form here, but we'll show it again at the end of the webinar for you to give an evaluation. If I sped through some of this, but again, we're happy to follow up on any of this a little bit later. So hope I haven't eaten up too much of August's time. I know he's got some good material.
No, that was great. There was one question that I didn't answer. It's a bit of a complicated question. Where was it? What is the recommended timeline for presenting data that demonstrates the impact of funding changes on English language services? While early observations suggest that the impact can be immediate, is there a standard or best practice for how long data should be collected to ensure the findings are robust and credible? So I think
we're limited a lot by, you're talking about data being collected. We're limited a lot by what is available. And you're talking about English language populations, you're very likely talking about the census. And so you're maybe wondering at this point in the census cycle, can I be presenting these data? And I don't have an easy answer to that. Quite often, you simply don't have a choice. There isn't this information cross-tabulated by mother tongue or language of work or whatever it is that you're considering available. What you can do to help with that is look back in time and see how much things have changed, and that gives you a sense of how credible the data is. In some cases, the community isn't going to change that much in the 5 years, but in other cases, it may change greatly. And a little bit of ground truthing is involved. But I honestly, I don't have an answer for that particular question. But I would be happy to talk more about it. I'm sensing that this might be from SADC when you but, we'll have a chance to talk about that more. But yeah, maybe it's good to give August time to.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up the slides here. All right, so this is my section of the presentation. First, I'm going to be going over some storytelling with data, and then we'll quickly talk about some benchmarking, some change over time, and some working across geographies. So storytelling with data is actually a book. It's a data visualization guide for business professionals. It's really good. I highly recommend it. If you're savvy, you could probably find a PDF online to download. If you're not savvy, then it's worth every penny. And it covers these 6 main topics that I'm going to go into in more detail. So understand the context, choose an appropriate visual display, eliminate clutter, focus attention where you want it, think like a designer, and tell a story. So it's all about storytelling, not just presenting the data, but actually making it speak to the audience, right? And communicate the messages that you're trying to communicate. So the first is understand the context. So focus on the pearls, not the oysters. So what this means is that you want to focus on your explanatory analysis and not your exploratory analysis. So if you had to ask, 100 different questions to find out the two answers that prove your point, people don't want to know about the 100 different questions. They just want to know about the two pearls, the 2 points that you're able to make, right? You also want to nail the who, what, and how. So that, who are you communicating? What is the form of communication? How can you prove your point? And this goes into context. So context is the environment, culture, psychology, and physiology of your users. And then your user is the audience, customer, or agent. And then your content is like what you actually have control over. So document signage, data types, or the structure of things. So we see this Venn diagram, and in the middle, there's something called IA, which is information architecture, but you can just kind of think of that as understanding. So understanding is made through the connection of these 3 groups: content, context, and users. But the only thing that we really control is the content, right? We don't control the user. Like sometimes we get to choose our audience, but not often. Usually our audience is given to us. And context, we really don't get to choose, like our environment that we're in, the culture, the psychology of the audience, the physiology of the audience is not like something we control. So we have to control the content to go into that context, right? To get that overlap happening between the circles to build understanding. So an example of environment would be like, is the person going to be at home sitting on a couch reading this? Or are they going to be at work? Are they going to be listening to it in the car? So all these different environments. Then culture. A good example of culture is like, the color red. In our culture, Western culture is usually associated with bad. But then if you go to Eastern cultures like China, red's associated with good. So you want to know that, right, when you're creating your content, so that you can match your content to the context to create the understanding. And then physiology, I find very interesting. That's like the actual physical characteristics of your audience. So like say your audience has some sort of disability, knowing that is very important for your content and shaping your content. Something that's great is distilling your message. So boiling things down to a 3-minute story or just a single big idea. You want your big idea to be a complete sentence, which is hard to do sometimes. Another great thing is to go low tech first. So like trying to do things on paper, on physical medium is great because people tend to get really attached to stuff they create on the computer. Like you feel like you're putting in all this work on the computer. You don't want to delete the things. You want to, just move them around or rework things. Whereas if you have just a sticky note, it's very easy to just throw out the sticky note. If you're working on pen and paper, it's very easy to cross things out. So yeah. Choose an appropriate visual display. So things you want to do are keep it simple, match the graph to the goal, respect the zero baseline, and avoid the evil charts. This is going to be maybe a bit of a contentious topic, the evil charts. And those are things like 3D effects, pie charts, donut charts, secondary axes. And they just are hard to understand. Like usually if you have a pie chart, it can just be a bar chart and it'll be more effective as a bar chart. Matching the graph to the goal. So if you have continuous data, then you probably want a line graph. If you have categorical data, then you probably want a bar chart. I would say like bar charts and line charts are where I'm going to be 90% of the time for my data visualization. It's just the bread and butter, right? It's simple. And then if you can keep it even more simple and just have a large number with some text explaining it, that's great. So if we see this example down at the bottom, the left graph has a non-zero baseline and the right graph has a zero baseline. And we can see in the left graph, the effect looks massive, right? The difference between the bars looks huge. But in reality, the difference between these bars is very small. And in the left graph, we're just super zoomed in on it, right? So you want to respect the zero baseline. Or, if you're trying to communicate something, maybe you disrespect the zero baseline because you're trying to communicate a certain thing, right? They say, what is it? Statistics is, sort of an art form as well. So maybe if you're trying to communicate that this tax cut is really bad, then you want to use the left graph because people are going to misinterpret it and you're going to have a bigger impact, right? But that's not really a great way to present the data if you're trying to be, fair. So eliminating clutter. So reducing cognitive load, stripping out noise, leveraging something called the Gestalt principle, and embracing white space. So everything on a page, like as soon as you see a page, you're just inundated with information. Everything's taking brain power. Even your environment all around you, the things beyond your screen are going to be taking up your brain power too. So like all this visual clutter, you want to try to eliminate. So if we look at this example down at the bottom, in the left dots, we very clearly see columns, but in the right dots, we very clearly see rows. And this just has to do with the spacing of the dots. And depending on the spacing of the dots, our brain interprets it as columns or interprets it as rows. And this is related to the Gestalt principle, where we're trying to visually group data, right? So you can use like proximity as well, or color. We're going to go over an example. So this is the starting point, bad example. For me, I find this to be like very cluttered, very confusing to look at. I'm not sure, where my eyes should land first. And now if we look at the other graph, or the next slide, it has all the exact same information. The only thing that's been changed is the spacing, the alignment, the use of white space, and some coloring. And it's now much clearer, right? So now we know we're demonstrating effectiveness. That's, my eyes go to that right away. What attributes are the most important? And we have these bars highlighted now. Instead of having lines going to the centered text, right? The centered text, which isn't aligned with anything, we have left justified text, which lines up nicely with the bars that are bolded. And the bold words line up with the categories very nicely. We're also using a lighter gray for the less important aspects, like the axes label is switched to be a lighter gray. It's made smaller. The data source is made smaller, made a lighter gray because it's not very important. Just different things like that, right? You want to try to guide the user, and we're going to go over this a bit more later. You want to try to do have people's eyes go into Z formation, because that's how people read, right? They read from top left to bottom right. So when you look at this, it's very hard to figure out from the top left where you're going to the right and down, right? How you should be moving your eyes. Whereas with this example, it's a lot clearer. I find it to be anyways. So focus attention where you want it. So tap into iconic memory. So iconic memory, if we go back to the example of the color red, so an iconic memory for someone in China might be that red represents good luck, whereas iconic memory for someone in Canada might be that red represents bad, something bad, right? Or stop, like a stop sign. And this iconic memory that you're trying to tap into it's sort of before people can even perceive the graph, they're seeing these things, right? They're seeing the size, the color, the position before they even understand what's going on. And that's why, like, when you look at this chart, it's kind of uncomfortable, whereas this one, right away, it's more comfortable because our focus is being brought to these different elements and just makes it more comfortable in our mind. And we're able to use more of that iconic memory because we know that bolded terms, are important. It's part of our iconic memory. Highlight sparingly. So we did bold stuff, but if you bolded everything, then you bolded nothing. So a good rule of thumb is about 10%. Design in gray. Gray is good. It's hard to see. If you're producing for people who are visually impaired, then gray might not be a great choice because of the contrasting with white, and it might have not suitable contrast levels. So that's important to consider. And then applying bold color draws attention. So in here, we're using a lot of gray, and then we're using the bold color to draw attention to the demonstration of results, the affordability, the experience working together previously. And then, like I was saying, use that Z pattern because that's just how we naturally scan a page. So this is a little demonstration of this, focusing attention where you want it. This task, you're supposed to count the number of threes within these numbers. It's hard. You got to go through every single number and count the threes and keep that count in your head. It just looks like a jumble to me, right? Like it's just a jumble of numbers. My brain does not even want to count the threes. But if we bold the threes, then it becomes instantly clear that there's 6 of them. Like I barely even have to count. I can just look at it and see that there's 6. It becomes much easier on the eyes and a much easier task for the audience. So thinking like a designer. So form follows function, making it accessible, perfecting the aesthetics and guiding the audience. So if we look at these 2 charts in the bottom, they're displaying the same information, just very differently. So we have the bar chart on the left and then the line chart on the right. And the idea here was that this comes from a newspaper that was talking about how the new marriage rates by education are highest for bachelor degrees or more. And from the left graph, that's not super clear. But from the right graph, it's very clear because instead of having all this visual clutter of all these different bars and the bars being colored by year, we just have 4 lines, right? So we go from having like 25 bars to just having 4 lines. We did something, we took the number and we rounded it, right? Because if you think, talking about partial people doesn't really make sense, so you might as well round it, and that makes it look a bit cleaner. What else did I want to go over on this one? The alignment of elements is very important. Like you can see that all of this is aligned nicely. If we go back to this example again, I love how, this all lines up. It's just so nice on the eyes. The spacing is great. So on the left, this would be like a bad visualization. On the right would be a better visualization. Because really when we're looking at bar charts like this, we kind of only care about the top of the bar chart, right? We only care where the information actually is. And what you're doing by converting these into line charts is you're taking those tops of the bar charts and overlaying them so that you can see the differences more clearly. So design matters a lot. Tell a story. So using a 3-act structure, we all know this: beginning, middle, end. So, set the context in your beginning, develop the conflict and data, and then the call to action at the end. Create tension. So the problem, talk about the problem, frame it around the problem. Use the power of repetition. So this is something that's great for presentations as well as for data visualization. Bing, bang, bongo method is what they call it. Which is where, you tell people what you're going to cover, you cover it, and then you summarize it at the end for them. So, at the beginning of this presentation, we went over the table of contents, what we're going to be talking about, and now we're going through the content. And then if I was a good presentator, at the end, I would, summarize everything for you. Check your logic. So ensure horizontal logic and vertical logic. And what I mean by that is the content of your slide or of your visual should explain the title, and the title should explain the content of your visual. Like if you were just given the title, you should be able to figure out, what the visualization is going to be. And if you were just given the visualization, you should be able to figure out what the title is. They're both complete packages on their own. Make them the hero. So the story isn't about you, it's about the audience, and the data should equip them to take action, right? It's not enough to just present the data. So on the left, we're presenting the data, right? We have these bar charts. We have the statement that price declined for all products on the market since the launch of Product C in 2010. So we can see Product C right here. I'm not sure if you guys see my cursor, but Product C has this green bar first, which represents 2010. And then you can see after the green bar, the bars start getting smaller. So we can see that from this chart, but it becomes a lot clearer when we switch over to a line chart. So now we can see when C is introduced in 2010, these lines start going down, right? And Our title here is to be competitive. We recommend introducing our product below the 222 average price point in the $150 to $200 range. So the title is like, well, the title is retail price over time, but you're given the statement at the beginning, which has a clear beginning, has a middle, and has an end just in this statement, right? So to be competitive, we're setting the context. We recommend introducing our product below the $220 average price point, developing the conflict of data, and then the call to action is the price point should be in the $150 to $200 range, right? And we sort of repeat that using the bingo, bongo, bango method, because the recommended range is on the graph as well, right? So it's a bit repetitive, but that's good because it helps with our understanding of the data. So now we'll quickly go over some benchmarking. So, what is benchmarking? And benchmarking is just evaluating a community's data by measuring it against a standard point of reference. So there's like 4 main types of benchmarking, I would say, and those are geographic hierarchies, peer group benchmarking, temporal benchmarking, or benchmarking over time, and then normative standards. And I'll go through quickly each of them. So data without context is just a number. Benchmarking turns that number into an insight by answering the critical question, compared to what? So geographic hierarchies, we can take things like our different levels of geography and then look at a measure such as average rent and see how it changes depending on the level of geography. So this census tract that I chose has an average rent of 1,986. And if you just take that, right, if these other rows weren't there, this would mean nothing, right? Like, okay, the rent is 1,986. Like, who cares? What does that mean? Is that high? Is that low? Is that affordable? Is that, all these different questions pop into your mind when you just have this single number. But then we can look at, things like the census metropolitan area, which should be similar census tracts because they're in the same neighborhood or the same census metropolitan area, and see that it's 2,198. So then we might say, okay, well, it's relatively cheap for a census tract within the CMA because the CMA average is much higher. Likewise, we can look at things like the census subdivision, the census division, the provincial, and the national as other geographic hierarchies to benchmark against. Another form of benchmarking is peer group benchmarking. So here we're just looking at census metropolitan areas, and I guess you could consider these peer groups because they're CMAs, they have similar scale, and they're just generally grouped together. So we have Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, but we can see the average rent is very different between Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But those are like the 3 big cities in Canada. So those are sort of peer groups, right, of big cities. So temporal benchmarking, this is benchmarking over time, so using your own past data. So this sort of goes into what the question in the text was about, like how do we measure the effect before and after, right? And that really, I would say, has to do with your baseline, like how much past data do you have? If you have a year of past data that you're comparing against, then maybe you want a year of data collection after the effect to really make sure that it's robust. But it's going to be about, the type of effect that you're trying to understand, right? Like if you want the long-term effect, then you can have a short-term effect and you can do some predictive modeling based off of that to find the long-term effect preemptively, like predict it. But that won't be nearly robust as actually just collecting the data over a long term. Whereas if you just want the short-term effect, then you can just collect the data over the short term, like the immediate impacts, right? So it's going to depend on the question that you're asking. And it also depends on how quickly these things are changing, right? Because if something changes very rapidly, then if you have a very short time scale, it's going to have a lot of noise, right? Because it's changing rapidly all the time. And you might have to collect data over a very long time to see like the actual upward trend or downward trend within all the noise. Hopefully that made sense. So normative standards. So these are just benchmarks that are based off of, like policy goals and legal mandates, established thresholds. So the example here is core housing need. The core housing need has 3 normative standards: affordability, adequacy, and suitability. And those are shown in the chart. So for affordability, shelter costs represent less than 30% of total before tax household income. This is like a benchmark for affordability, right? And then a benchmark for adequacy and a benchmark for suitability. And these are just standards that are used. So why does this matter? It matters for identifying gaps, justifying resource allocation, and setting realistic goals. Oh, and I wanted to, where was it? Oh, no, it's on a further slide. That's okay. So someone like identifying hidden gaps, a town might have a growing economy, but their peer benchmarking might reveal that they're growing at half the speed of similar towns, signaling an underlying issue. So like if you're just tracking growth and you see growth, then you're going to think, oh, okay, this is great. We have growth. That's what we wanted. But if you don't contextualize that, if you don't have a benchmark where you're showing, that growth in comparison to growth in other areas, then it's sort of meaningless, right? Like, what if everybody grew? Then nobody kind of grew because it's all relative, right? And yeah, so it's very important for contextualizing the data, right? And then justifying resource allocation. So if you can show that specific census tracts are worse off than the CMA average, this could provide evidence for localized funding. Setting realistic goals. So if you have benchmarks, then the goal that you're trying to hit. Whereas if you don't have a benchmark, you really don't know what you're doing. You don't know if the data is good or bad because you don't have anything to compare it against. So benchmarks are very important. So on the right here, we have this visual taken from the rental housing affordability dashboard, and we can see this yellow represents the most expensive census tract. And if we just looked at this census tract with this huge average rent, we would think that Guelph is a very unaffordable place because it's, like $700 over the national average. But really, we need to look at, all the different census tracts within Guelph and compare them against each other and compare them against the overall average to know whether or not Guelph is affordable. Just looking at the single census tract doesn't really allow us to do that. It doesn't have those, or it doesn't show those hidden gaps. Likewise, this might be a place where we could show that this census tract needs more attention for affordable housing because their average rents are so high. Of course, you'd have to look at more data, like you'd have to look at the incomes of the area as well to calculate the affordability and stuff. But that would be, a jumping off point. And likewise, with the lowest point of the data, you might then make the argument, or you might want to investigate why the rent there is lower than other areas, right? And allocate resources based off that. So some potential pitfalls. So going back to the example with the peer groupings, so the census metropolitan area peer groupings, you want to avoid the false peer trap. So matching communities based purely on population size can ignore massive differences in demographics, industry, or geography. So based on population size is just one way of grouping peers. You can group peers, based on rurality as well, or based off, other demographics. And I would say that with Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, this is an example of the false peer trap. So these are the 3 largest cities in Canada, but they're still very, very different in population size. And we can see that population size is not correlated to average rent either. And if you look into this, you find out that, Toronto used to have rent control and then they got rid of rent control in 2018. Montreal has their own way of doing rent control where it's linked towards the building more than the tenant. So like if a tenant moves out, then they can't just arbitrarily raise the rent to anything they want, whereas in Toronto they can do that now. And then in Vancouver, they have a different inflation-based calculation for raising rents. So like their peer groups, they're the three biggest CMAs, but when you're talking about average rent, you can't really compare them because of how different the politics are of the area and how that heavily affects the rent. There's also, you don't want to have an outdated baseline. So using a baseline from a period before a major structural shift. So like the global pandemic that happened, using data from there would not make a good baseline because, this world event happened that's, messed everything up. It's not representative of, how the world normally operates. Moving target metrics, so ensure that the normative standard or census boundary definitions haven't changed over the years, which ruins the comparison. So like, for example, I watched this video the other day on IQ, intelligent quotient, and every like couple of years they have to renormalize the intelligent quotient to be standardized. 100 IQ points is the middle of the bell curve. So if you're comparing IQs from today to 100 years ago, you have to take that into consideration that the normative standard has shifted, and what it was normal back then is not normal now. Yeah. So now we're going to talk a bit about change over time. So types of trends. So when you're analyzing change over time, you're looking for three main sort of trends, which are your long-term trends, your seasonal fluctuations, and your cyclical movements. So in this chart here, we can see that there's very clearly a seasonal fluctuation happening here. It sort of looks like a sine wave. But overall, the long-term things are increasing, right? The underlying pattern, the trend in seasonality is that it's increasing. And then we observe a bunch of noise, right? Yeah. So that's like what you're looking for in change over time is these long-term trends and these seasonal fluctuations and cyclical movements. So how do analysts actually measure this? So there's this wonderful graphic that I made with AI. I mean, I don't want to say that I made it because the AI made it, but I think it looks really nice. So there's three main ways, and those are trend analysis, cohort analysis, before and after impact analysis. So in trend analysis, you're just tracking a single metric sequentially to see the trajectory. So like how is high school graduation rates changing over time? It's just a single metric that you're tracking over time. Whereas a cohort analysis, you're tracking a group of people who share a common characteristic over time. So, following the health income of infants born in a specific area code in 2010 over the next 15 years. So you're following that cohort over the period of time. And then before and after impact analysis. So this goes back to the example question someone had asked. So measuring a community metric before a specific intervention or policy change and comparing it to the data afterward. So that's another way that analysts measure change over time. So why does this matter? Evaluating impact, providing predictive planning and resource allocation, distinguishing noise from signal. So like, if you see a sudden spike in community complaints in July, you might be alarmed by this sudden spike, but if you look at historical data, you might realize that every July you get community complaints, and those are just due to heat waves. So like this, when you have the historical data, it prevents you from overreacting to these events, right? Because they've already happened before. You know from the historical data that this has happened before, and the reason why it's happening in July is because of the heat waves, right? You know that there's no action to be taken. Likewise, with predictive planning, if you know that over time, the population of senior citizens is increasing, then you're going to want to plan for the future where you have a high population of seniors because you know from the data that over time it's increasing. Yeah.
August, just a reminder that we have around 15 minutes to the end of the webinar.
Okay, cool. Cool. We're almost done here. Change over time. So some potential pitfalls. The correlation versus causation trap is huge. So if we plotted something like ice cream sales and shark attacks together, we would see a very strong correlation between them. But that does not mean that ice cream sales causes shark attacks, right? That makes no sense. It's really this third factor, the nice weather, that causes both of them. More people are out in the water because the weather's nice, and more people are buying ice cream because the weather's nice. So they're both being caused by this third effect. And even that, I would say, is still, a correlation, not necessarily causation. But we have a very clear example of a causation on the right here with how smoking leads to lung disease. So smoking directly introduces toxic chemicals that damage lungs. That damage directly results in inflammation and then the development of lung cancer. So one thing directly results in another, right? So this is causation, whereas the other one's just correlation. And it's very hard to prove causation. It's very easy to find correlations, right? And there are so many things that are correlated that don't have any cause and effect relationship. So you got to watch out for that. You also have to watch out for changing definitions. So like the government could change what constitutes affordable housing. The normative standard could change. Like maybe instead of being 30% of your after-tax income, it's 40% all of a sudden, or 20%, 25%. How does that change over time? And if it did change over time, you need to know that. Data gaps, so missing data points, can break the continuity of your time series. And then things like pre-COVID versus post-COVID, things like income data can be very skewed. So you got to think about the context of when this data was collected. So working across geographies now, we'll just very quickly go over this. So there's a link here to go to Boundary Files, and you can download the Boundary File directly from Statistics Canada. There's two types, cartographic and digital. I prefer the cartographic because it really outlines everything, whereas the digital just kind of chunks together these northern parts. But depending on your need, they're both good. And then there's 3 geographic area types: administrative, statistical, and non-standard. And if you go to the website, you can explore that more. There's also a lot of different file formats to download these geographies. And yeah, we'll just go over briefly the geographies. So census division, census subdivision, dissemination area, aggregate dissemination area. These are all building blocks of each other. So the census subdivisions go into the census divisions, the dissemination areas go into the census subdivision. They build up from each other. And then we have CMAs, census agglomerations, and census tracts. So the definitions are there. It's not very exciting. I'm sure a lot of you guys know this stuff. Yeah. Working across geographies. We could have more content on that in the future for sure if people are interested. Yeah, thanks. I hope that was clear. I hope that was helpful. Again, I really recommend that book, Storytelling with Data. It's great. Contact me if you want a PDF version, and I can get that available to you. And please fill out the form. That really helps us to plan our future events.
Thank you, August. So we have around 10 minutes, and I believe we will share the form again that we shared at the beginning, and I will share some resources. But in the meantime, I believe there will be a Q&A session. I'll pass it to Michael for leading that.
Yeah, well, I guess again, I want to direct people. I put the link for the Google form in the chat. So feel free to answer the questions there. It should only take a minute or two, hopefully. Were there any questions or material that you wanted to be covered more? We don't have a ton of time, unfortunately, but for some things we could certainly stay a little longer. I saw there was a question. Oh yeah, Martha.
Yeah, my question was, well, first of all, I really appreciated the presentation. Thank you very much, both parts of it. I was particularly drawn into the second half when we were looking at cleaning up visualization. And I'm currently working with an application that seems a little bit limited in like what I call like the making it visually cleaner. And I'm wondering if you had a recommendation on visualization tools that had a lot of flexibility in them to play with graphs, the axes, the titles, this shaping and size and spacing and stuff like that. If you had something to recommend.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on the capacity that you guys have. We use Tableau, which is great.
Yeah.
It has tons of flexibility. I believe now users can use Tableau Desktop for free, but you don't have access to Tableau Prep, which is really useful. But you can explore Tableau for free now, which is great. They allow you to create, Tableau package workbooks just as individual users. Another great one's Power BI if you're a Microsoft company. What are you using right now? I'm curious.
Well, right now I'm using ClickUp.
Okay, I've never heard of ClickUp.
Yeah.
Interesting. But even just Excel can be
Yeah.
really powerful,
Yeah.
right? Like all those graphs that I had shown today and the visualizations that I had shown today, I believe those were all built in Excel.
Okay.
And not to keep hammering the falling back on AI, but Excel can be frustrating to deal with. Those little headaches of getting the formatting just right. AI is actually quite good at walking you through how to deal with those annoying little format things. I want the space to be increased slightly, but I'm having a hard time finding it. How do I do this and that? It knows the program quite well.
This is AI that's attached to Excel within Excel.
I just get frustrated in Excel and I go to AI and say, here's my problem. Can you tell me how to do it? And it will walk you through, go to this menu, select this, do this.
Some of the AI now is...
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Some of the AI now is so sophisticated too that you could ask it to create the visual for you.
Yeah.
Like, outline exactly what you want, and then, it'll probably produce a pretty good visual for you. Just double check that it's accurate because it can have inaccuracies, right?
Great.
But Tableau is wonderful. It's a bit hard to pick up, but once you get the hang of it, the amount of options you have for design are just endless.
Great. It came to mind. I'm not as familiar with it. So when I saw what you were doing, I thought, probably Tableau. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
In the meantime that you may want to prepare your questions, you can put it in the chat box or raise your hand and ask your questions. I put some links that we shared in this webinar and also upcoming webinars link. And if you haven't already subscribed to our newsletter, there is a distribution list sign up that you can sign up for any new data, upcoming webinar, and other updates that we share with the community. Yeah, and then the recording and the webinar presentation slides will be shared on the webinar page. And that PDF version one, you can send email to information@communitydata.ca or august@communitydata.ca. Awesome. If there is no other question, thank you so much for joining us.